This is Chris with Dive Zone Scuba for another technical diving tips, techniques, and trips video. Our next overseas trip will be to Cayman Brac in June of 2023. The Cayman Islands just recently opened up, so we're very excited to return to Cayman Brac after a 3-year hiatus. Cayman Brac offers fantastic shore diving and is one of my favorite diving locations in the Western Hemisphere. We will be diving with the Brac Scuba Shack with Liesel and Zeus. As with all trips, we've instructed the divers to check out their gear prior to departing on the trip. In this video, we're going to go over the things that we typically do in the pre-dive trip gear check procedure. If you find this video helpful and would like more content, please subscribe to the channel. So one of the things that you want to check out as part of your pre-trip gear check is obviously your regulator set. And so first off, if you know you have a problem with your regulator set, you should take it to a qualified service technician and have them take a look at it. And even if you don't have a problem, taking it into an authorized technician is not a bad idea. But what we're going to talk about today are some simple checks that you can do on your own, which will help you determine whether or not your regulators are going to be okay to use, or whether you should seek a certified regulator technician to take a look at it. All right, so first thing is that you can do these checks that we're going to be talking about without a tank, but they work much better if you have a tank. So you can rent a tank from your local dive shop, or if you're on good terms with them, you could probably bring your regulator set in there and they would let you borrow a tank. All right, so one of those things that would be categorized under that type of check, that needing a tank to do, would be your transmitter. So if you have a air integrated transmitter and you wanted to know, okay, is it actually working, then the only thing you could do is pressurize this, because most transmitters don't actually activate until they are pressurized. So you could tell whether or not the battery was working or not. Some computers may actually, the transmitter may say what the battery strength is, but you still won't know whether or not the transmitter is actually working unless you were to hook it up to a tank. So the transmitter itself, functionality, and also the battery is one of the things that you would want to check out. I have just a pressure gauge on this regulator set, and this is another thing that you're going to need to check out with a tank, and that's if the spool inside here has sustained some damage and it's leaking. Then that's the only way you would be able to tell that you have a problem. Same thing with the hose, the high pressure hose. In many cases the high pressure hose has some sort of damage inside, and there are these little pinholes that are around the high pressure hose, and if there's a rupture on the inside, then you can see bubbles coming out of the tiny pinholes in the outer sleeve. So you can only check that with a tank, and then you would actually have to put the tank in the water. All right, so that's another one of those things. Same thing with the second stages. If you're worried that there's a possibility that the seat could be old, then only by pressurizing the regulator would you be able to tell that the seat needs to be replaced, or you need some kind of adjustment. But what can you do with these when you're trying to check them out and you do not have a tank? It's not possible for you to have access to a tank. You can still do some things. And so one of the things that you can do is you can see if there's any kind of problem with, for example, the diaphragm. Now, some regulators have a thing, like the atomic regulators have a thing called a seat-saving device in here, and so it can cause a little bit of confusion when you're doing this. But in general, regulators, if you have a cap on there, a dust cap, this of course is a DIN regulator, but if you have a dust cap on there, then if you go put your mouth on this, and then you try to you try to inhale off of it, then you should not have the ability to do that, and you should be able to develop a suction. Okay, so I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna try that on this. Yes, and in fact, you can feel the diaphragm suctioning in on this. Okay, so that way you know that the diaphragm, the main diaphragm on here, is not punctured, and also that the exhaust diaphragm on the bottom here in the exhaust port, that's has a good chance of functioning. Okay, so sometimes this is where the confusion occurs with some regulators. I'm going to stick my finger in here the best I can, and I'm going to try the same pressure test on this. And the reason why I have to do this is with the atomic regulators, you have this seat-saving device, and it can be opened up a little bit. And so if I inhale off of the alternate here, it's possible that the air could come through this regulator here. Okay, so we're going to see what happens when I do this with my finger plugging the hole. Okay, so I can feel the suction start, but what I do feel is I do feel the seat saver going away. So I'm going to try to put my thumb on here a little more and see if I can do the same thing. Okay, so that's actually a pretty good suction, so I'd have confidence that this also would be good. But if you can, again, if you can inhale easily off of the regulator, then you know that you have either a diaphragm problem in the front, or you have an exhaust diaphragm. So those are two checks that you can do on your regulator set to see if there's going to be any kind of issue with that. Okay, so again, if you encounter any weird things with either one of your regulators, then it's certainly a good idea to have it take it into a service shop. All right, now let's take a look at this thing. Okay, the inflator hose, and so this is one of the items that very few people pay any attention to, and it's actually very important because it inflates your BCD. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see that in the video, but there is a little thing inside there called a Schrader valve, and this is what the Schrader valve looks like. This thing here, and this is similar or maybe even the same thing that you have in like a car tire valve. So most inflator hose have this, and this thing lives a hard life and can easily be corroded, and so sometimes this thing does not work properly and it has to be replaced. Now, during the pre-dive safety check, it's a good idea to check on this thing to make sure it's actually seated properly in the inflator hose. And I did encounter a really interesting situation where I was involved in teaching a technical diving course, and one of the exercises was a BCD inflator malfunction. And what happened was the guy connected his hose to his inflator, but he could not take it off. Okay, it was just like impossible to take off. And what we subsequently found out was that the Schrader valve inside his inflator hose had actually backed off enough to prevent the inflator from being disconnected. Okay, so that's the first time I actually ever saw that, and I don't know what the probability of it happening ever again is. But this being like a pre-dive safety check, you can use a tool like this. This came from AutoZone, or you can use one of these multi-tools. They typically have a little valve wrench in there. And so basically you're going to be sticking it down inside here until it engages with the grooves, the flats on the inflator. And you just want to make sure that once you get this on in the right position, you want to make sure that it's tight. Okay, so if you do that, then there's very little chance that this will come out. But in that particular diver's case, this was loose and it somehow backed itself out just enough to prevent it from coming off. Okay, so that would be something that you could easily check yourself in addition to some of the other things we've been talking about. Okay, so again, the regulator set, and I can't emphasize enough the fact that this is an important piece of gear. And if you have any issues with it, you know you have an issue, or you discover an issue that you really need to take it into a dive shop to a certified technician. I've had people that have had problems with their regulators for one reason or another, and they brought it back in a bag, in parts in a bag. Okay, so you definitely don't want to do that because then it could become a very serious situation. Okay, so regulator set is definitely one of the things that you want to take a look at during your pre-trip dive check process. You should also check your dive computers as part of your pre-trip gear check procedure. And here I have my computers, and obviously you want to check them for functionality. Okay, and it's a good idea just to cycle through some buttons. I did have a situation once where I had a computer where it turned on, but the buttons didn't actually work, so it was very difficult to do anything with the computer. So it's a good idea just to try out the buttons to make sure that they're working okay. So we'll check out both buttons, and pretty simple check. Okay, and as part of that, you also want to check out the battery strength. Most computers have some kind of battery strength indicator, so these are both full. But it's also a good idea to carry some extra batteries with you. And here I have actually two SAFT 3.6 volt batteries, and then I also have two batteries, CR2 batteries for my transmitter. Okay, so check the functionality of your computer, and also make sure that you carry extra batteries with you. If you are looking for an exotic battery type, you may not be able to get it at the other end. Rechargeable batteries are another issue. When you have a rechargeable battery, generally, if it's an integrated one into the computer, people will generally not have one of those. So that's a risk that you take with a computer that has an integrated rechargeable battery. Okay, so again, computers are very important pre-trip dive gear check that you need to do. So one of the things you want to do before your trip for your gear check is you want to take a look at your plate and wing or your BCD. With this particular plate and wing, I've got a Dive Right Rec EXP model, and I've also got a stainless steel plate. So some of the things that you want to check on your BCD is the inflator. You want to make sure that the inflation button is not sticking. That's a very common occurrence. You want to make sure that it's articulating freely so it will not be stuck from hardened lubricant. Another thing that you would like to check is the dump valve down here to make sure that's tight, okay, and that it can release air. Another thing to check is the fitting on the back of the hose that goes into the bladder. You want to make sure that that is tight and you don't have any issues with that. You might also want to check the hose to make sure the hose does not have any weak points. We've actually had a situation where somebody bent their hose like that and it actually split in two. So then the other important thing that you want to do with your BCD is you want to inflate it. You can orally inflate it using the release button here on the top. You can orally inflate it, or it is actually better to hook this up to a regulator on a tank because it can generate higher PSI. So basically what you want to do is you want to inflate your bladder or your BCD as much as you can and leave it on overnight to make sure that you don't have any leaks in it. So those are some of the few things that you should do in order to do a pre-trip gear check prior to leaving on your trip. Dive lights can be used for not only night diving, but also for looking in crevices during the day, and also for signaling. So taking a look at your lights is an important pre-dive trip gear check. Alright, so for the lights, there's only so many things that you can do. Obviously, you want to check for functionality to make sure that the lights work. But some of the other things that you would do typically is make sure that you open up the light and take a look at the battery to make sure the battery is not corroded. And this would actually be a good time to lubricate the O-rings on the battery compartment. Basic things like that. So that way you'll know your dive light is working when you actually show up somewhere and you're ready to go diving. You could also take a look at, for example, if you have a lanyard. This one's looking a little worn. If you have a lanyard, whether or not that needs to be repaired or not. Here's a primary light, and I keep this shield, this battery shield on this one. I'm not using it because I don't want it to be turned on. But anyway, so you're going to do the same thing. Just take the battery compartment, open it up, and verify that your battery's not corroded. Everything's going on. Everything's good with that. And you might even want to clean off the O-ring. I've got a little bit of sand in here, so I'd probably want to clean off the O-ring as well as lubricating it. Okay, and of course, again, after you check out to make sure everything is good there, you'd want to check for functionality to make sure that it works. Here's a little dive light. I like this. I actually use a Snorkel keeper to pin this to my my valve, and it's one of these little flashing or multicolor things. Alright, so one of the things that a lot of people don't take a look at is their chargers. And so not only do you want to make sure that your flashlights are working, but you also want to make sure that your chargers are working. Okay, so sometimes if you go on a liverboard in particular, the connections can become corroded from the solid air, so you want to make sure you don't have any issues with that. And just the fact that they actually work, they're operating, they're actually charging things. We usually carry spare batteries with us. We have had instances where a rechargeable battery crapped out in the middle of a trip, so we generally also take a spare battery with us just in the event that happens. With LED lights, all the lights that we do use are LED lights, so there's no such thing these days with batteries, flashlights like that, about carrying spare bulbs. Okay, so again, lights for the different purposes that they're used for are very important for most dive trips, so please take a look at those during your pre-trip dive gear check. One of the other major categories of equipment that should be inspected during the pre-dive trip gear check is photography equipment. So there is a vast amount of different types of photography equipment, so I'm not going to be able to really talk about many different types, so I'm going to speak in generalities. Okay, so obviously you want to make sure that your camera works, you want to turn it on, you want to cycle it. That's very important. Another thing is if you have a camera housing, you want to make sure that's totally functional, that your O-rings are in good shape, that sort of thing. You also want to check out your batteries. Make sure that you have a sufficient number of batteries. Your batteries are in good condition, and it's not a bad idea to actually fully charge your batteries before you go on a trip. We've been on many trips where we've not had a sufficient number of batteries, and if one battery craps out, then maybe we only have one more battery, and that has caused problems. Another thing is accessories. You see this big pile of GoPro mount accessories that I have here. I could probably get rid of a few of these, but in general, I've seemed to keep acquiring different accessories, whether I have it mounted to my my light, my primary light, or if I have it mounted to a selfie stick. So make sure you have all the different accessories that you need in order to mount your camera in various ways. Okay, these are what is in here. I think these are just charging cables for the charger here. Okay, so photography equipment, if you do photography, is just another thing that you need to check before you go on your dive trip. Your mask, fins, and snorkel are another category of gear that you should check. Make sure you know where they're at. For me, one of the things that I need to check on the trip is to the pre-dive trip is to make sure my bungees are on my fins, that they're in good condition. And also I will check the mask. I have a situation where I have to wear corrective lenses in my mask, and so I actually carry several masks like this, and I make sure that everything's in good condition. You might want to check the mask strap here. That's one of the things that a lot of people carry in a Save a Dive kit. But if you have a mask strap that's in good condition, the chances of you having a problem with that are fairly low. So mask, snorkel, and fins are another category that that you need to make sure that is all set. There are other accessories that you want to make sure that you have. You could, for example, inflate your DSMBs, but I think that's probably not really necessary. But you do want to make sure that you also have your finger spool's not tangled, that sort of thing. Okay, so there are accessories like the DSMBs that you just want to make sure that you have. The last category of gear that I'm going to cover for the checks are things like boots, gloves, hoods, and wetsuits. Of course, if you have a dry suit, that's a more complicated situation. You might want to carry spares for that. Believe it or not, we've had people that have showed up that have two the left or the right boots, and obviously that doesn't work for many people. So just make sure that you have a actual set of boots that you can dive with. Okay, so not too much involved in this unless you have a dry suit, which you might also want to do have that checked out, a leak test, and so on. Okay, that's it for this video. Dive safely. This is Chris with Dive Zone Scuba. I hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching. Please subscribe.